I never expected anything strange to happen during one of my tutoring sessions. Tutoring, by nature, is supposed to be one of the most boring, routine things in the world. You show up, sit across from some overly patient grad student, and try not to fall asleep while they walk you through things you should have understood weeks ago. That's how it had always gone, until it didn't. It started on a Tuesday. I remember that because Tuesdays were the only day I didn't have class until noon, which meant I could sleep in, roll out of bed like a zombie, and shove whatever notebook I needed into my bag. I wasn't trying to impress anyone, especially not my tutor, Evan. Evan was a couple of years older than me, probably mid-20s, and working on his master's in physiology. He was smart, borderline intimidating, but also weirdly chill. He had this quiet confidence, the kind of guy who never seemed rushed, always leaning back in his chair with that annoying little smirk, like he knew something you didn't. He never pushed too hard during our sessions, just watched me figure stuff out at my own pace. I liked that about him. And yeah, okay, I noticed he was kind of good looking. Dark hair, soft stubble, usually in worn tees that hugged his arms in a way I tried not to notice. But I'd never let my brain go anywhere with it. He was my tutor. That was the whole deal. Period. So when he offered to move our usual campus library session to his place that day, the library's packed, he'd texted. I didn't think twice. His apartment was walking distance from campus, and I figured it would be more relaxed. Maybe even easier to focus. Come by around 11, he said. I've got class at 1, so we've got a solid window. I showed up right on time, still in my gym clothes from that morning. Sweat-damp shorts, a tank top clinging to my skin. I didn't think much of it. Evan answered the door barefoot, in joggers and a black hoodie, and let me in with a nod. Sorry it's a bit of a mess, he said, even though it wasn't. The place was clean, minimal. A few open textbooks scattered on the coffee table. A candle burning near the window. Soft music playing from his laptop. He gestured to the couch. We can work here. I just need to grab my notes real quick. I dropped my backpack and realized too late how soaked through my shirt was. My back was practically glued to the fabric. Gross. Hey, do you mind if I change real quick? I asked. I brought clothes. Didn't think I'd still be sweating like this. Evan paused near the hallway. Nah, go ahead. You can use my room. It's the first door on the right. I thanked him and headed down the hall, pulling the door mostly closed behind me. The room smelled faintly of his cologne, clean, a little citrusy. His bed was made, nothing too personal lying around. I found a corner near the dresser, peeled off my tank top, and reached into my bag for the clean shirt I'd stuffed in earlier. I didn't hear the door open. I only noticed when I stood up straight and turned slightly toward the mirror above the dresser and caught the reflection of someone in the doorway. Evan. He was standing still, watching. I froze, shirt half on, my skin still sticky with sweat. For a second, neither of us said anything. His eyes met mine in the mirror, and it was like he hadn't even realized I'd seen him. Evan, I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. He blinked, then stepped into the room and, without a word, reached behind him and clicked the door shut. And then he locked it. The sound of the lock sliding into place echoed in my head louder than it should have. It wasn't aggressive. It wasn't rushed. It was quiet, casual even, but it still made my skin prickle. Sorry, Evan said finally, his voice low. Didn't mean to startle you. I turned fully toward him, the clean shirt still bunched in my hand. Were you watching me? He rubbed the back of his neck and let out a small breath. Not quite a laugh, but something close. I knocked. I guess you didn't hear me. I didn't. My voice came out flatter than I intended. That's kind of the point. He nodded slowly, his gaze dropping for a moment, then returning to meet mine. There was no fake excuse coming, no rambling backpedal. Just this odd stillness in the air between us. A hum of tension that hadn't been there a minute ago. I'll unlock the door, he said finally, reaching for the knob. But he didn't open it. He just turned the lock back and stayed there, one hand on the doorknob, the other hanging loosely at his side. He looked over his shoulder at me again, then let go of the handle. You can change, he said quietly. I didn't mean to make things weird. I didn't move. Not right away. The rational part of my brain told me to just pull the shirt over my head, walk out, and act like none of this happened. But there was another part, quieter but more honest, that was hyper-aware of how his eyes had looked in that mirror. Focused, curious, almost like he'd been trying to memorize something. I slowly slipped the shirt on, dragging the fabric over my shoulders. He watched for a second longer, then stepped back with a murmur. I should have waited. I'm sorry. I followed him back down the hall, a little unsteady on my feet. We both pretended like nothing happened. We sat at the coffee table, opened our notebooks, and Evan went straight into a breakdown of enzyme reactions like everything was normal. But it wasn't. His voice stayed calm, steady, but his hands kept fidgeting with his pen cap. His eyes, usually laser-focused on the whiteboard or my notes, kept flicking to me, quick glances, subtle, like he was trying not to get caught again. I should have ignored it. I should have focused, but my heart was still pounding, and not from embarrassment. About 15 minutes in, I made a mistake on one of the problems. I crossed out my answer, annoyed, and muttered, "God, I'm such an idiot." "Don't say that," Evan said quickly. I looked up. He was leaning forward now, elbows on his knees, the pen forgotten in his hand. "You're not stupid. You're actually doing way better than when we started." I felt my face heat up, mostly from the sudden attention. I forced a small laugh. "Yeah, I guess." His eyes held mine a second too long. Then he said something I hadn't expected. "You ever notice how easy it is to forget who's looking at you until you catch them?" I blinked. "What?" He looked down, like maybe he regretted saying it. "Forget it." "No. Say that again?" Evan's shoulders rose, then fell in a slow exhale. You looked kind of different today when I saw you. Not in a bad way, just different. And I guess I didn't expect to notice that." The air between us got very still. I wasn't sure what he was saying. Or maybe I did. Maybe I just didn't know what to do with it yet. He stood up and walked toward the kitchen, giving me space. "You want some water or something?" he called over his shoulder. "I've got a break between classes, so we're not rushed." I didn't answer right away. Because now I wasn't so sure I wanted to leave. I should have left. That was the thought echoing in the back of my mind as I watched Evan pour water into 2 glasses, the ice cubes clinking softly in the quiet. There was something too calm about the moment, like we were both pretending it was normal, but the silence said otherwise. He handed me a glass and sat across from me again, his leg brushing mine briefly before he adjusted his position. It wasn't on purpose, maybe, but I felt the spark of it anyway. My skin was still warm from earlier, and the contact was enough to send a quick jolt through me. "You good?" he asked. I nodded, taking a sip of water I didn't need. "Yeah. Just distracted, I guess." "About what?" he asked. He said it lightly, but his eyes were searching mine again, steady, a little too perceptive. I shrugged. "You tell me. You're the one who made it weird." That made him smile, faintly, though there was something nervous about it too. "You're right," he said. "I did." He leaned back, exhaling. "Look, I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable. It just happened. You were standing there and He stopped himself, eyes darting toward the window before meeting mine again. It wasn't appropriate, I know that. Something in his tone threw me off. He wasn't defensive. He wasn't even really apologizing the way people usually do when they've crossed a line. They rush to justify it, to make it smaller. Evan wasn't doing that. He was just honest. I stared down at the table, at the pages of my notes I wasn't reading. "You could have just said something." "I know," he said quietly. "I didn't want to." That last part made my chest tighten. "Didn't want to?" He gave a small laugh, but it wasn't amused. "Yeah, because that would have meant I had to look away." For a long second, neither of us spoke. I should have said something, called him out, changed the subject, stood up and left. But I didn't. I just sat there, staring at the ink smudges on my notes, aware of how close he was. The smell of his cologne, the faint scrape of his thumb tapping against the side of his glass. When I finally looked up, he was watching me again. Not in the same way as before, but with a kind of quiet waiting, like he was giving me a chance to tell him what this was, or what it wasn't. "Evan," I said, breaking the silence, "I don't even know what to say right now." He nodded once, slow. "Then don't say anything." I felt the tension spike in my chest. He stood and walked around to where I was sitting. I didn't move, not even when he stopped just behind my chair. The air between us felt alive, charged, like the pause before a thunderstorm. I could feel his breath, the faint heat of it against the side of my neck. "You're shaking," he said softly. "I'm not," I lied. He laughed quietly, barely audible. "You are." My pulse was loud in my ears. "What are you doing, Evan?" He was close enough now that his words brushed the side of my skin. "Trying not to do something I shouldn't." I turned slightly, enough to look up at him. His jaw was tight, his expression unreadable. He looked like he was fighting with himself, caught between stepping back and not being able to. "You're my tutor," I said, even though it sounded more like a question than a statement. "Yeah," he said, "and right now I wish I wasn't." He exhaled sharply and stepped back, breaking whatever fragile thread was holding the air between us. "We should call it here for today," he said, his voice quieter now. "You can head out." I didn't argue. I just nodded, gathered my things, and stood up. But before I could walk to the door, he spoke again. "Hey," he said. I turned. "You don't have to come back next week if you don't want to." I hesitated at the door. "Do you want me to?" His eyes flicked up, just for a second, then down again. "Yeah," he said, "that's the problem." I didn't text him for a few days. I told myself it was because I was busy, but that wasn't really true. I had time. What I didn't have was clarity. Every time I thought about our last session, about the door locking, the way he looked at me, the way I didn't stop him, I'd go in circles. Was I overreacting? Underreacting? Was it just a heat of the moment thing, or something he'd been sitting with longer than I realized? By Friday, I gave in. "Hey, just checking. Are we still good for next week?" He replied less than 10 minutes later. "Evan." "Yeah." "Same time work for you?" Me. "Yeah." That was it. Simple. No mention of what happened. No weird tension in the messages. Just tutoring like always. But when I showed up that next Tuesday, there was something different in the air. The apartment was the same. The soft music. The window cracked open. A candle burning near the TV. But Evan looked different. Tired, maybe, or just guarded. "Hey," he said, stepping back to let me in. "You want to work in the kitchen today?" I figured we could use the whiteboard. "Sure," I said. "We didn't mention it. Not the last session, not the door, not the way I'd caught him watching, but there was a carefulness to everything now. How he kept his distance, how his voice stayed in that measured tutor tone, how he never once let his gaze wander past my eyes. We spent the first 30 minutes going over cell respiration pathways. He explained everything clearly, calmly. But somewhere in the middle of one of his explanations, I stopped hearing the words and started paying attention to everything else. How he rested his hand on the back of his neck when he was thinking. How he clicked the cap of his marker exactly 3 times after every equation. How he kept checking my expression like he was afraid I might flinch. "You okay?" he asked. Catching me staring, I nodded. "Yeah, just thinking." He hesitated. "About the material?" I didn't answer. He set the marker down and leaned back against the counter, arms crossed loosely. "You don't have to pretend it didn't happen," he said finally. "Last week, I mean." "I'm not pretending," I said. "I just don't know what to do with it." He nodded once. "Fair." There was a long pause before he spoke again. "For what it's worth, I'm not proud of that moment. I've been replaying it all week." I looked at him. "Because you regret it?" "No," he said, almost too fast. Then softer. "Because I didn't give you space. Because I let a personal feeling bleed into something that was supposed to be professional." His honesty was disarming. I didn't expect him to own it like that. Most people would have just brushed it off or pretended it didn't mean anything. Evan didn't. "You're not the only one who noticed something," I said. He looked at me, brow slightly furrowed. "What do you mean?" I shifted in my seat. "I don't know. The way you looked at me, it didn't feel one-sided. That landed like a pebble in still water. Not loud, but enough to make ripples." Evan looked down, jaw tightening. "It wasn't." There it was. He didn't explain it, didn't rush to clarify or apologize. He just stood there, the silence between us suddenly gentler than before. Eventually I said, "So what do we do now?" He gave a half smile, the first real one I'd seen from him all session. "We finished glycolysis. That quiz of yours isn't going to pass itself." I rolled my eyes, but I couldn't help smiling back. "Fine, but after glycolysis, we talk." He nodded. "Deal." And so we did. Not everything was figured out in that session, not even close. But the tension had shifted. It wasn't sharp anymore. It wasn't confusing or loaded. It was just cautious, curious, and maybe, for the first time, it felt like something that didn't have to be avoided. It just had to be understood. We didn't talk right after the session. I thought we would, but after going through glycolysis and the practice quiz Evan pulled up for me, things naturally wound down. The academic tone faded, and for the first time all day, we weren't student and tutor. Just two people sitting across from each other, both clearly aware there was something between us neither of us had named. "You want to stay for a bit?" he asked as I packed up my things. "Not tutoring related, just stay." I hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, I do." He led us out to the small balcony off his living room. The sun was starting to dip behind the apartment buildings across the street, and the air had that cool snap that hinted fall was coming. He sat on the bench near the railing. I leaned against the side, my arms crossed, looking out over the street. We were quiet for a long time, comfortable but charged. "So," I said finally, "about last week." Evan let out a breath. "Right," I turned to face him. "I've been thinking about it a lot." He looked up at me, waiting. "Not in a, what the hell was that kind of way," I continued. "Just, I don't know. I've never had someone look at me like that before. Not someone who tried so hard not to cross a line." He nodded slowly. "I wasn't trying to be creepy." "You weren't," I said. "You were careful. I think that's what threw me. You were careful and still—" I knew. He looked back at the street. "It's not something I planned. You came into my space and, yeah, I noticed you. But I've always noticed you. That day just got away from me." There was something raw about the way he said it. No manipulation, no flirting, just plain truth. I sat beside him. Not too close, but not far either. "Can I ask you something?" He glanced over. "Yeah." "If I hadn't caught you, would you have said anything?" He was quiet. "Probably not." "Why?" Evan ran a hand through his hair. "Because I'm your tutor. And I didn't want to be that guy, the one who makes things weird, the one who blurs things just because he can." "You didn't make it weird," I said. "At least, not in the way you're thinking." "Yeah?" His voice was softer now. I nodded. "You were honest. Awkwardly, maybe, but honest." He smiled a little at that. "I've had feelings for you for a while, but I told myself it didn't matter. I was just helping you pass a class." "And now?" I asked. He shrugged, exhaling. "Now, you're sitting next to me after I watched you change and locked a door I never should have locked. And somehow, you didn't run out." I looked at him carefully. "Because you didn't try anything. You didn't cross that line. You just reacted." His eyes met mine, and it was like neither of us knew what to say next. "I don't know what this is," I said, "but I don't want to stop showing up. And I don't want you to pretend like it never happened." "I won't," he said immediately. "But I also don't want to rush anything, not until you're ready." Neither of us should rush, I agreed. We sat there until the sun dipped below the skyline, the shadows stretching across the balcony. He didn't touch me, and I didn't touch him. But there was something steady about the silence that followed, like we both knew we'd crossed into something real, something worth moving slowly for. Maybe it started with a locked door. But now, it felt like the opposite, something opening. I didn't expect to see him that weekend. We hadn't made any plans. There'd been no texts beyond the usual. Reminders for the next session. A heads up about a worksheet he'd scanned and emailed me. It was all back to business on the surface. But under that, it wasn't the same. I could feel it in how I read his words. How I kept wondering if he was thinking about that moment on the balcony the way I was. Saturday night, I went to a small house party hosted by someone in my physiology class. I didn't even want to go at first, but a couple of guys from my lab group convinced me, saying it'd be good to let off some steam before midterms. I figured it'd be a bunch of people awkwardly drinking from red cups, talking about test stress and pretending they weren't 2 beers from crying over GPA anxiety. It kinda was. I was halfway through my first drink when I saw him. Evan was across the room, near the kitchen, leaning against the counter with a bottle of water in his hand, talking to someone I vaguely recognized from the biology department. His posture was casual, head tilted slightly as he listened, but then his eyes flicked up and found mine. There wasn't a smile. Not right away, just a kind of stillness in his expression, like he was just as surprised to see me as I was to see him. He excused himself, weaving through the crowd, and stopped a few feet from me. Close, but careful. "Hey," he said. "Didn't expect to see you here." "Same," he said. "Friend from the program dragged me out. Said I needed to. Socialize like a human." I smirked. "You look uncomfortable." He laughed under his breath. "Yeah, I'm better in study groups than dance floors." "Noted," I said, sipping my drink. A silence stretched between us. Familiar, but different this time. We weren't sitting across a table, and there were no notes between us to look at when things got awkward. "You good?" he asked, his voice quieter now. I nodded. "I am. It's just weird seeing you here. I don't know how to act." He tilted his head slightly. "What do you mean?" "I don't know," I said, looking away. "We've been pretending things are fine, and they are, but now it's like, I don't know if I'm supposed to act like we're still just tutor and student, or if we're something else." His expression softened. "You can act however you want. There's no script for this." I looked back at him, and he was watching me again, like he had that day in the mirror. Except this time, he didn't look away. "You want to step outside?" he asked after a beat. I hesitated, then nodded. We slipped out onto the back patio. It was quieter, the music inside muffled to a dull thump behind the sliding glass door. A few people were smoking on the far side, but otherwise, it was empty. We stood near the edge of the deck, under a string of lights swaying in the breeze. "I haven't stopped thinking about that night," Evan said finally. "I know," I said. "Me either." He shifted slightly, facing me now. I keep replaying it, wondering if it was one of those heat-of-the-moment things or if maybe it wasn't. I cut in. Not for me. That seemed to surprise him a little, in a good way. "I thought about what you said," I continued, "about noticing me before. I think I noticed you too. I just didn't let myself admit it." He exhaled slowly. "So what now?" I shrugged, but my voice stayed steady. "We take our time. You're still tutoring me. I still need to pass this class. But maybe when the semester ends, maybe we see what this is." A slow smile crept across his face. Small, but real. "I can work with that." He didn't lean in, didn't touch me. But he didn't have to. The space between us wasn't tense anymore. It felt like a quiet understanding. Maybe nothing needed to happen tonight. Maybe the important thing was knowing it could. From that night on, something shifted between us, but not in a dramatic way. We didn't start dating. We didn't get physically involved. We didn't even text differently. But there was a kind of quietness in how we treated each other that felt new, respectful, open. During tutoring sessions, Evan was still Evan, methodical, focused, sometimes annoyingly good at sensing when I wasn't paying attention. But now, there were little things I started noticing, like how he'd sit just a little closer than before, or how he'd glance up more often when I was working through a problem, like he was watching me, not for mistakes, but because he wanted to see me figure it out. Sometimes I'd catch him doing it and call him out with a grin. "Why are you staring at me?" And he'd smirk. "Because your confused face is kind of entertaining." We both knew that wasn't the reason. One evening, after we wrapped up a session earlier than expected, Evan offered to make dinner. "Unless you've got somewhere else to be," he said. I didn't. He made pasta, poured wine, not in a fancy date night kind of way, just casually, like it was something we might have done even if none of this, whatever it was, had ever happened. We sat on the couch while it cooked, watching dumb clips on his laptop and occasionally brushing shoulders. At one point I said, "You know, this is probably wildly unethical. Tutor feeding his student. He snorted. I'm not feeding you grapes. I think we're safe. After dinner, I lingered. Not intentionally, but once we cleaned up, I just didn't want to leave. Evan didn't push. He sat back on the couch, feet up, flipping through something on his tablet. Eventually, I sat next to him again, and we both just existed. No conversation, no tension, just proximity. Familiar, easy. Can I ask you something? I said later. He looked over. Yeah. If we weren't in this whole tutor-student thing, if I didn't need you to help me get through bio, would you have asked me out by now? He didn't hesitate. Yes. That answer sat heavy in my chest, but not in a bad way. It felt honest, like everything he'd done up until now, holding back, staying patient, was because he was giving me time. I guess it's good. I'm not great at biology then, I said, half laughing. He smiled. You're not bad, you just haven't been trying as much as you could. Wow. Okay. What? You want me to lie? I nudged his leg with mine, and we both grinned. Eventually, I stood to leave, but before I reached the door, he said, Hey! I turned. His expression was serious, but soft. Thanks for coming tonight, not just for tutoring. Thanks for cooking. We stared at each other for a second longer than necessary, both of us half expecting the other to move forward. But we didn't. Not yet. Instead, I stepped out into the hallway, heart thudding a little faster than it should have been. It wasn't the kind of night that ends in a kiss, but it was the kind of night that made you realize you'd want one eventually. And maybe sooner than later. The semester moved faster than I expected. Finals week crept up, and suddenly every building on campus reeked of coffee and stress. I stopped by Evan's place twice that week, once for a review session, once to go over mock exam questions. Each time, the air between us was steady, familiar, but also filled with something unspoken. It wasn't just the academic pressure, it was the countdown. The last tutoring session came on a Thursday. I knocked, he opened the door, and for a moment, we both hesitated. Last one, I said. Yeah, he replied, stepping aside. Weird, huh? He made tea, and we sat at his kitchen table like always. I was quieter this time, focused, but not really. I think we both knew we weren't just wrapping up biology. After I walked him through a particularly convoluted metabolic pathway with only 2 mistakes, my personal record, he leaned back, arms crossed, smiling faintly. You did it, he said. I haven't even taken the final yet. Still, he said, you're not the same student I met 3 months ago. Is that a compliment? It's a fact, he said. And yeah, it's also a compliment. The room went quiet again, the kind of quiet that fills space when neither person wants to break it the wrong way. I closed my notebook and looked over at him. So this is it? He looked up. For tutoring? Yeah. I hesitated. What about the rest? He didn't look away. That's not up to me. I stood up and leaned against the counter, arms folded. Well, the way I see it, I'm officially not your student anymore once the exam ends. He smirked. Technically. And my exam's tomorrow. He nodded. I walked back over to him. Not rushed, just close enough. I think I know what I want now, I said. His eyes searched mine. Yeah? I nodded. I want to find out what this is. Not as a student, just me. He stood slowly. Then we're not breaking any rules. None, I said. Clean slate. He stepped forward, not even hesitating this time. His hand brushed mine, and when I didn't pull away, he leaned in. It wasn't a dramatic kiss. No sweeping gestures, no fireworks. Just quiet, warm, and careful. Like he'd been waiting for this moment, and now that it was finally happening, he didn't want to rush a single second. When we pulled back, his smile was softer. I've wanted to do that for a long time. Yeah, I said. I know. I passed my final, barely, but it didn't matter. Because now, tutoring was over. But something real was just beginning.